The property-based council tax has been with us for more than 3 decades. It was designed as a fairer alternative to the much-maligned poll tax. But in the years since, the council tax itself has become increasingly unpopular. That sentiment is likely to deepen when Scotland's councils decide on local tax rates for next year. Hikes of up to 10% may happen in certain areas. This comes as the Scottish Government consultation gets underway on how to make the council tax fairer. So, will that happen? We discussed the case for change with the journalist from the National, Shona Craven, and David Phillips from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which today published a paper on the subject. David, your research shows that over half of properties in Scotland are effectively in the wrong council tax band. Why is that? What are the consequences?
Well, at the moment, council tax is based on the property values of April 1991. That's 34 years ago, the age of the Soviet Union. Now, I think many people know that property values overall have gone up a lot since then. That isn't really the issue, because what you could do is you could just reset the band value thresholds so that the same proportion of properties were in each band, but based on up-to-date values. But the real issue is that different properties have gone up by very different amounts. Mm-hmm. Some properties have gone up by, 5-fold, others by 3-fold. And that means that compared to a situation where everyone was valued now, and the same proportion of properties were in each band across Scotland as a whole, only about 40% of properties are actually in the right band. Around 30% are in too high a band, 30% in too low a band. And you can have properties that are now worth very similar amounts, paying bills hundreds of pounds a year different, just because they used to be worth different amounts back when Gorbachev was president of the Soviet Union. Right. So it's a system that's really a relic of the 20th century and needs to be brought into the 21st century. OK,
that's interesting what he's saying. It's a relic. Do you feel the council tax is unfair? Should it be reformed?
Yeah, and I think what we need to remember, of course, is many of the properties people live in now in Scotland didn't exist at the time of that valuation. So that's created a lot of distortions. And there have been calls, of course, and the SNP have been saying this for a long, long time, that they want to reform the council tax. And the question is always, how radical a reform do you want? But what everyone, I think, can agree on is that it's not fair that the valuations are so off, and that whatever the rates are set at, it should be fair and it should be based on the accurate value.
Yeah. And David, a lot of people think it's unfair, but people can't agree on what reform should look like. What do you think would be a good way to update it?
Well, I think at a bare minimum, you do need to do that valuation so you're getting things based on a fair current value. I think many people worry that means everyone's bill is going to go up. That's not the case, because, as I said, you can reset the band thresholds. So if you wanted to, while some people would see their bills go down, others go up, the average wouldn't necessarily have to change. Now, I think you could go further as well as the out-of-date values. Many people have recognised that the tax rates on properties are a much higher share of the property value for low-value properties. So if you're in a band A, you pay a tax that's around, say, a third of a band H property, but your property is only worth maybe a tenth as much or even less. So you could also try to address that, the regressivity of the tax. I also think the Scottish Government needs to be looking at the tax system as a whole. There are opportunities to make tax not only fairer, but more economically efficient, more pro-growth. So we currently raise a lot of money from property taxes when you sell the property, land and building transactions tax. That gums up the housing market, makes it hard for people to move for jobs or to downsize to a better home. Reduce that, increase the council tax on high-value properties. You have to make this fairer, better for the economy and better for people's well-being.
OK, so from what David is saying, there are going to be winners and losers if the houses are reclassified. And does that point to why politicians are reluctant to change the system? Because there will be people that are paying, more. Because the SNP pledged to scrap the council tax in 2007, didn't they, and replace it with local income tax, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, and also just about 18 months ago, we had a consultation that was relating to increasing the amount of council tax that the higher banded people in higher banded properties would pay, and overwhelmingly people didn't support that, because it came back to, maybe people in band E or F or G should pay more, But until we can get the banding fair, it wouldn't actually be fair to do that. So there will be winners and losers, but I think it'd be hard to argue against a revaluation. One of the difficulties of that in the past is the cost of doing that. But I think with technology and everything being digital, that's less expensive to do now. And so it's just such an appealing thing to do. Unless, of course, you want to get rid of council tax altogether and go to something like a local income tax. But if you're going to base it on property values, you have to do a revaluation.
David, the Scottish Government did introduce some reform in 2017, but that wasn't fundamental, was it?
Yeah, so what the Scottish Government did in 2017 was it increased the tax rates on those top bands, E, F, G and H, around the top quarter to a third of properties in Scotland. But it didn't update the values. And as it's just being said, that means that you're not necessarily actually increasing the taxes on the most valuable. You're doing it the most valuable back in 1991. So I think there is a case to, really bring these reforms together, revalue before doing any other reforms, make your changes to council tax alongside other changes to taxation. And I'd also say that just because there are going to be winners and losers under any reform, we shouldn't, forget that there are losers under the existing status quo as well. And that by bringing council tax more up to date, and importantly, keeping it up to date in future, we should never let ourselves get into this situation where values are 35 years almost out of date. With a regular cycle of evaluations, this could be a much easier thing. It's just part of everyday life. Every few years, your tax band changes to reflect the composition. That should be the position we try to get up
because
to
there
in
is the
Scotland.
technology. Do you think this will happen? Because the Scottish Government has launched this consultation, Shona, along with COSLA.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will be saying, oh, why hasn't this happened sooner? And there's certainly wording from the Scottish Government about consensus, about working with COSLA and the public and getting people on board. And as I say, you're making this case, which is very difficult to argue against, for a revaluation and have that be the starting point. And only then can you really look at whether you adjust those higher bands again, following it happening in 2017. That would be the first step.
OK, and we will leave it there. But David and Shona, thank you very much indeed for joining us.